Hello and welcome to today's episode. We will be discussing the legendary Tomb Raider game. And so this is the original one that first premiered on the Sony Playstation and on the Sega Saturn too, back in 1996. But before we do that though, we'll get into our Role of Gaming segment where I've selected some 7 games that I'll be discussing. And so if you're new here, basically what I do is I have an Excel sheet that I have a bunch of games listed on there, and then I just use a number generator to pick 7 games for the week. So 1 game per day, and so I'll talk a bit about them as much as I know about them, and then after that, I throughout the week I will post a gameplay segment of some sort on these games on my YouTube channel for Arcade Amigo, and also on TikTok at Arcade Amigo as well too. My hope with this is that it's been sort of like an ongoing virtual library of games that you can browse through, right, and kind of get an idea of what these games are all about. Because I'll be having games on there anywhere from like the second generation all the way to the ninth generation. I say second if you're not familiar. The first generation was just a bunch of like almost like these machines that were just kind of like Pong clones, right? So they're definitely interesting to check out, but otherwise they're just not really kind of hard to like I guess emulate or anything unless you have the original hardware. But anyways, after that though, I'll get into some modern gaming news. And with this here, I try to keep up as much as I can with modern gaming news, but I do kind of more of a casual approach as I'm not able to keep up with everything, up to the minute. And so my hope with this is just that, just more to have just a discussion on what's going on in gaming nowadays. And then after that, though, is where we'll get into the more meat of the podcast, where again, we're talking about Tomb Raider. And so what I do with these here is it's a bit of a casual retrospective, a little bit of a casual. I know these kind of contradict each other. A casual deep dive, I guess, and a bit of a review, and just my overall experience and thoughts on the game. I've been trying to pick games more recently that I feel were not only good games, at least at the time they were released, a game that I really like, but also a game that kind of helped move the video game industry forward in one way, shape, or form or another. And so again, this week will be for Tomb Raider. So Tomb Raider for me, when I think about like the Mount Rushmore of video games, uh, Lara Croft would almost be on there. I might consider Lara Croft being on there. At the very least, I feel like during the 5th generation, if we're picking like a new character that I feel had a lot of like cultural relevance and all, and in the 5th generation, I would have to say it's probably Lara Croft. I mean, I think of like Pac-Man in the 2nd generation, and then I think of Mario in the 3rd generation, and then I think of Sonic in the 4th generation. And in this generation, I got to give it to Lara Croft, I think, and I feel like when her games were coming out, she became an instant icon. Her games sold really well. They were, for the most part, pretty well received. And even though eventually the games didn't age quite as well, the impact that she had on the gaming industry, I think, was pretty big. And so I wanted to shine a spotlight right on her first initial game. And also, to get anyone familiar with this game, if they're not, if they've never played it before, to maybe get themselves hyped up and ready for the remake that's coming out next year, which I believe is called Tomb Raider Legacy of Atlantis or something like that. I believe it comes out February of next year. But with that out of the way, though, let's go ahead and start getting into it here with Role of Gaming. I gotta say, when I pick these games, most of these here, I don't have a whole lot of familiarity with them. So this will be interesting to capture some gameplay footage of these and all, and just for my own sake, right? Get more familiar with them, and then hopefully provide more knowledge as much as I can, right? For anyone that isn't aware of these games, and even if like I said, if I don't have anything much to say on these games here, I'll have some gameplay segments posted on my YouTube and TikTok channel there. But starting off though is Clockwork Knight. This one I do have some knowledge on. And so I did actually cover the Clockwork Knight 2, so its sequel, a few months back. So it's on my channel there. And but this was the first one. And so this came out, let's see, was it at the launch? I don't quite recall if it was a launch title. I think it was for the Sega Saturn in the United States. But basically, it's a action platformer, and it was pretty cool because so the character was like CGI graphics, so kind of thinking the lines of like what they were doing with Donkey Kong, and so you played this knight, Peppachu or something like that. I think is his name. It's like a toy Clockwork Knight, and so it's sort of like a Toy Story, really, is what these games are all about. But it's a 2.5D side-scrolling platforming game, and you use your Keyblade as a weapon. And so you're just going around the stages, going through different parts of this kid's room. Yeah, so like in this one here, let's see, it starts off. I kind of forgot how this game starts off, but I know eventually you go like on this, like kind of like on a train set, and then eventually you're fighting this transformer-looking enemy on top of I think like a bookshelf. But it's actually pretty impressive with the graphics because the graphics are all like in polygonal 3D back, and so back in the day, I believe it was running like about a smooth frame rate. I think maybe 60 frames, and so it was pretty outstanding to see, right? And you know, 60 frames per second with polygons was truly incredible to see. And so this is definitely a looker when it first came out. The gameplay is pretty decent. I think at the time when it came out, it was kind of panned for not having the best controls and a bit simplistic. Even though the graphics are pretty impressive, I think a lot of people still wanted to see like full 3D games. And so I think that's why this one didn't, get maybe the love it deserved back then. And I still think though it's a pretty fun, solid platformer. So I would say definitely check it out, right and all if you're into those kind of games. The overall theme and everything. Again, if you like Toy Story and all, right, I don't see why you maybe wouldn't like this game unless maybe it's perhaps a little too kiddie. The music though can be a bit grating, but I mean it fits the game well. It's just kind of like okay. But overall, it's a fun platformer. Like I said, the visuals are actually pretty outstanding, and that Transformer boss, I remember getting a kick out of him. Back in the day, I thought it was pretty cool looking. And the last boss too, I haven't quite gotten to him, but I remember seeing screenshots of it, and looks pretty impressive. Yeah, definitely check it out. Again, the only way I can think of playing this game though is through emulation. And so anyway, so this is part one. The one that I covered a few months ago was part two. But they really both kind of seem like they were meant to be one big game. It's just for whatever reason they split it up into these two games here. But this one definitely ends like on a cliffhanger, right? That part two picks right up on. But next up though is for Pokemon Soul Silver version. If you've listened to anything that I've done here on my podcast, I have almost zero knowledge of Pokemon stuff, or games and all. So I don't know much about this one other than I believe it was on the Nintendo DS. So I will, I guess, learn more about it along with everyone that hasn't played this game when I post it up on my YouTube channel. I know that these Nintendo DS games for Pokemon games were pretty popular. So here's another one, right? That apparently a lot of people know about, apparently, except for me. But the next up, though, is Grand Theft Auto Liberty City Stories. And so this is the game, the Grand Theft Auto game that came out on the Sony PlayStation Portable. And it was pretty impressive to see that they were able to fit like pretty much a full-scale Grand Theft Auto game on a handheld. Now, again, the PSP is basically like slightly underpowered PlayStation 2, I guess, is one way to put it. Maybe on some things the PSP could actually do better, but I mean, but Grand Theft Auto 3, came out on the PlayStation 2, right? So why wouldn't it fit on the PSP? It was just kind of mind blowing though at the time, right? Because I think we were still trying to wrap our heads around that, portable gaming could be, really mimic like a console like experience, and I think that was sort of like the shocking part of it. But Liberty City Stories, so it's set within the Grand Theft Auto 3 universe, and so meaning that there's a lot of the similar characters that are, or same characters that are from Part 3 over in this one, as this is actually kind of like a prequel. And so the events take place before the events of Grand Theft Auto 3. So you play, is the character's name Tony, I think? And so in Part 3, this Tony character, he's one of the characters that you get missions from. And so in this one, though, you actually control the character, right? So again, in his younger days, and so you're part of the Italian mob, and so you're out there doing Grand Theft Auto-ish stuff. I haven't gotten through this game. I played like maybe a handful of missions on it, and it seems cool. Like I said, it's Grand Theft Auto in the palm of your hands, and so it was pretty impressive at the time. The story seems funny. Definitely seems to have like the same sort of like style of humor and all that the original ones had. And so, yeah, I mean, like I said, if you really like Grand Theft Auto 3 and you want to explore that world a little bit more, definitely would recommend this one. It's, I mean, it seems to have a lot of the similar, again, everything about it. You'll be very familiar with the map as well, too. As on this one here, it's, it pretty much, yeah, like I said, right, it takes place in Liberty City, the same, basically, map layout as Part 3 did. And so for that there, so again, if you've already played part three, maybe, give it a little bit of time before you get back into this one if you just recently played it, because again, you're exploring kind of the same thing. But yeah, other than that, though, it seems like a pretty cool game overall, though. But next up, though, is a classic, though, in the kind of puzzle story-driven walking simulator-like game, and and that is Myst. And for all these years that I've played video games and all, I've never actually played Myst though. But it's pretty iconic though in the PC universe mainly, as it was one of the first big hits. I feel like for PC gaming, right? That kind of went a bit mainstream though, because the old school PC gaming, like when we're talking about stuff like on the Commodore, the Amiga, and all, I don't have a lot of familiarity with it. But I feel like it was pretty popular back in the day, right? Don't get me wrong, it was pretty popular. But then after that, when like Nintendo came out, and then eventually the fourth generation, PC gaming I feel like it became more niche. But Myst was a game though that came out that I feel kind of broke through that a bit into the mainstream some, as I remember it was all over the place back then. And I know it's like you're in some kind of like a island, I think, and you're trying to solve puzzles. And also, honestly, I don't know a whole lot about it, but it's I believe it's kind of like one of those point and click puzzle games. But from what I understand, though, it was really popular at the time when it came out, and seems to be pretty revolutionary for the kind of game that it is. And so I'll be interested in checking this out. I'm pretty sure I can get access to play it somehow. I just need to double check what I have in my library. And I might have like the PlayStation version, I think is what I have. But yeah, though, I think definitely it's worth checking out, and something that you can be pretty impressed by with what they were doing with these kind of games back in the day. Because I want to say I came out, I'm going to shoot for like 1993 to 1995 or so. I think is when this game came out originally. But we'll learn more about it though when I put up some video footage of it. But the next up is Tenchu Stealth Assassins. And so another game I haven't played. I played another Tenchu game. It was the one on the PS2. I think it's called Wrath of Heavens. But this one here, not familiar with it. And so it'll be interesting again to capture some gameplay footage. Um, it's so you control. I think the character's name is Rikamaru. He's like a ninja, and then also a ninja female warrior Ayami, I believe. I could get those names wrong, but it's like a stealth game, right? And so at the time, stealth games were starting to become popular by like Metal Gear. And so this game was kind of trying to do its own take on stealth, only you're a ninja now. And so that's about as cool as it sounds. At least if it's anything like the PlayStation 2 one, I'm sure I would really appreciate this game. And so definitely curious on playing it to see what it's all about. So yeah, I mean, you're set like in the feudal Japan days, and you're out there just doing stealth stuff, right? And so I know that I like the character designs to him and all, and at least I know what the PlayStation 2 one had like really incredible music as well too. So I'd be curious to check this one out here. But then next up after that though, we have Castlevania Portrait of Ruin. And so this is another Nintendo DS. Capturing footage of the Pokemon game, and then this too. And this game I did get a little ways into when it first came out. I One of the main reasons that I bought the Nintendo DS back in the day was because of the Castlevania game. So with Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow, and then this one, and then eventually that Order of Ecclesia. But I never actually beat either one of them though. But in Dawn of Sorrow and this one, I did get a ways into them, but never actually beat them though. And from what I played of this one, it definitely seems cool. It's if I recall, I think it is sort of like a sequel to the Castlevania Bloodlines game on the Genesis. I think you play like the son of the main character, that John Morris character in that, or something to that effect. So it takes place in a somewhat more modernish time, like I think within the World War One setting, something like that. But I mean, what I remember of playing of it, it's definitely classic Metroidvania, Castlevania style gameplay. And so this is when they were still on a roll, right, with coming out with these games. Because Castlevania was really defined by their Metroidvania style games from pretty much from like Symphony of the Night going forward up until like 2010-ish or so, when then eventually we started getting games like Castlevania Lord of Shadows and all. But there was a good stretch there where there was a bunch of like Metroidvania style games coming out of the Castlevania series, and this is one of the good ones too. You control a male character, and then also a female character who she's kind of like a magician, and you can switch between the two characters. So it's a pretty cool mechanic, as that helps you solve puzzles, defeat certain enemies easier. They both have their strengths and weaknesses, and then they're banter back and forth. So I don't know, it's kind of fun. So yeah, I mean, it's a cool little twist on the game. I wouldn't say it's like completely revolutionizes the series, but I thought it was pretty fun though, at least up until the point that I played it. And I want to say, I don't know, roughly I got about halfway through the game or so back in the day, but just never ended up finishing it. So yeah, will be fun to check more out of this game here as I again record some footage for it. And the last one here that we got is we're going way back to the starting up in the arcade days back in the 80s, and it's a game called Time Soldiers. I remember playing this game in the arcade back then. It's a top-down vertical shooter, and what I remember of it is like you played this character, and I think like player one is like in a red suit, and you have sort of like this laser cannon, but you're jumping through different time periods, and so I think you do go anywhere from like the prehistoric days to like the I think like the ancient Aztec days, or things like that, and you're go jumping through different time periods. I would assume maybe at some point you end up in the future, and I really loved the concept of it back then. Maybe because I was into Back to the Future movies. I mean, who wasn't back then? If you were around then, and so I don't know. I just love the concept of like you're a soldier right from the future, and you're going through different you know eras of time, and with a laser cannon, right, shooting like a bunch of dinosaurs and all, and then eventually some other enemies, from the different time periods. So I thought it was pretty cool, and so definitely curious to check this game out, because like, I kind of have vague memories of playing this in the arcade. And it was also this game did get a port on the Sega Master System, and I remember as a kid I really wanted to buy the Sega Master System version, just because again the little bit that I played of it in the arcades, or just watching other people play it, or even just watching the attract screen on this game for some reason just lured me a lot to it, even though I don't have the most experience with it. So this will be fun capturing footage. I'll see if I can get the footage of the arcade version. But from what I recall, I think the Sega Master System had a decent port. So, that might be a fun one to check out too at some point. I don't know if it was ported to anything else. I guess I'll learn more about it, because I also try to grab some information on the games as I'm posting them up on the YouTube channel. Just basic information like when it released, what systems it came out for, who developed it, and such. And so that'll be fun, at least getting some more information on that game. But Time Soldiers, man, that's a blast from the past, because there was a stretch there where there was a lot of those games that were popular, like Ikari Warriors, Heavy Barrel. Anybody remember those? And then Time Soldiers here, right, amongst a bunch of other ones too, like Gunsmoke and all. And they're fun games, right? They're sort of like these. Some of them are like auto-scrolling games, right, where automatically the screen moves up, and you're just shooting down a wave of enemies. But yeah, good classic arcade fun stuff. God, I can't remember who developed it though. But anyway, like I said, I'll get all that information later. But let's get now though into some modern gaming news. So we're starting off here with some Final Fantasy VII news. And so, if you're not a fan of Final Fantasy VII and the remakes and all, I will warn you right off the top, I am kind of a fan of it. And it's my favorite game of all time. Well, the original one anyways. And I'm part of the camp that does like the remake. And so I know that there's a lot of people out there that don't like it, but I personally really like it. And so anytime that there's like new news on it and all, I'm going to kind of geek out about it. There's been tons of like information that has come out from Hamaguchi just regarding what we can expect from the overall game. I almost feel like kind of doing like a little bit of a overview of all the information that has come out, because there's been a lot. He's been talking a lot, but at the same time, I kind of want to steer away from all that too, though. So I don't know. Maybe one of these days I may go into it or not. But here's a bit of news though that did come out, and so just wanted to share this. Um, but let's see, for Final Fantasy VII Revelation. So this is from IGN. So it's getting a story expansion pass. Store leak suggests. Uh, so Final Fantasy VII fans are getting excited for a story expansion pass that has been glimpsed as part of a new store leak. The Final Fantasy VII Revelation Story expansion pass can be seen now via a listing spotted there lurking in the depths of the Epic Game Store database, along with placeholders for up to 9 DLC packs. It is unknown what these DLCs might be for, so anything from fully fledged expansions to simple costume or item packs are possible. But the existence of a specifically labeled story expansion pass suggests some of these, at least, will be additions that comprise fresh narrative. Already, fans are speculating over what these DLCs might comprise, with hopes that elements could be adapted from animated spin-off movie Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, or third-person shooter Dirge of Cerberus Final Fantasy VII. Other fans are excited to see Genesis, the primary antagonist of Crisis Core, Final Fantasy VII in action role-playing spin-off released for the PSP. Exactly what will and won't be adapted remains to be seen, though this is likely Square Enix's last and best chance to add extra elements to its Final Fantasy VII remaster project, making it feel as complete as possible. Final Fantasy VII Remake launched back in 2020 for the PS4, and its enhanced integrated version later on for PS5, PC, Nintendo Switch 2, and Nintendo Series X and S. The trilogy's second slice, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, is all available across all platforms. And Final Fantasy VII Revelation, the concluding chapter, is currently set for launch in the first half of next year. So interesting. Typically I'm not one for like DLCs and things like that. But because I love this game so much, in my head, that actually has me a little excited, a little concerned though. I know that Hamaguchi's come out saying that he really wants to finish Final Fantasy VII, meaning that he said something along the lines of like that all that Final Fantasy VII is, right? So even like the compilation of Final Fantasy VII. So like Advent Children, Dirge of Cerberus, and Crisis Core, which as much as I like the original Final Fantasy VII, and I do like the remake a lot, so far what we've seen, I Advent Children was okay. It's okay. The action scenes are cool, but it's a bit convoluted and it's kind of boring actually. Dirge of Cerberus, Final Fantasy VII. I've played it a little bit. It seems pretty generic. I mean, any enjoyment that I got out of it was because it's kind of cool to see Vincent and all, and at the time, right, with those graphics that I had at the time. But from what I've seen of the story, because I've seen like some like the story over recap of it, and I'm like, what is going on? Like, I have no idea. I'm so confused. And so, if it was anything other than Final Fantasy VII, it wouldn't be something that I feel like I would be really into. So and then Crisis Core, I like Zack as a character. I think Zack is a cool character. The events around Nibelheim and when the Crisis Core sticks to that, I think it's pretty cool, right? Because you get to see in more detail what Zack went through right during that time. Because spoiler alert, everything that we knew of that incident was kind of through Cloud's perspective. But here we actually see it through Zack's perspective, right, as he's telling a story on that, or I should say, the story's being told about him on that. But the events before that, and even to an extent after that, Zack has a very spoiler. He has a very dramatic uh, final farewell, I guess, right, where he gets gunned down. But some of the events, I guess, basically to kind of sum it up, some of the side characters that are introduced in Crisis Core, which are kind of big to the plot of Crisis Core, and it seems like it would be big to the overall plot of Final Fantasy VII, I'm not the biggest fan of. Like the whole thing with Angeal and Genesis, honestly, I'm like, I don't know, I can really do without it. And so, but it's part of the lore that they created, and so that is my concern I have with Revelation is that I don't know, when he said that, I have a bit of a concern actually with Revelation because of it, because it's just not the biggest fan of that kind of stuff, right? That they've done with the Final Fantasy VII compilation overall. But I don't know. I guess we'll see. I mean, if it's if they mainly stick to the story that they've been telling from remake and rebirth, and then just expand on that in Revelation, cool. And then if you do like a lot of the other stuff, like I don't know, Genesis stuff or Angeal stuff or Crisis Core stuff or Advent Children or whatever as side content, okay, cool, I guess, right? But I just hope it's not too interwoven into the story of Final Fantasy VII. I don't know. I guess it's one of those things I have to wait and see until how it ultimately plays out. But not gonna lie, it does have me a bit concerned though. But I guess we'll see. We'll see what comes out of it all. But let's switch over here to Nintendo Switch news. And so The Elder Scrolls Oblivion Remastered got a release date. It's coming out on the 11th of August of 2026. And I'm kind of surprised on this that this game is still making its way out. I look at the Switch too. It has impressed me with some of the ports that it's had, but I still feel like it is eighth gen hardware. right? So when I think of the Switch 2, I'm thinking of stuff like the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. Maybe the PlayStation 4 Pro and the Xbox Series or on the Xbox One X, right? And maybe even a little bit more powerful because I know that there's been areas where the Switch 2 has outshone the Xbox Series S, right? Uh, but I still feel like the Switch 2 is 8th gen hardware. Again, not the most technical person right now. It's just when I've seen the games, that's what it looks like to me. It's 8th gen hardware, right? Which is still pretty cool, right? In a handheld form and all, and and it's still cool. But I don't believe like 8th gen hardware can really handle Unreal Engine 5 stuff that well. And again, I could be wrong, but Elder Scrolls Oblivion Remastered struggled even on PCs. And so, how good of a port, I guess, is this going to be as a concern here? And, honestly, I've played this remastered version. It seems cool, but I encountered a lot of glitches, though. It was kind of annoying me. And then with that annoyance there, and then as I'm playing the game, I'm like, I think I prefer the color scheme of the original one more. And so honestly, I don't know how much I would be into this remastered still. Initially, when it first came out, I thought it was kind of cool, but then as I played it a little bit more, I'm like, I don't know about this. And so I've kind of made a decision that if I go back and try to beat Oblivion, I got a ways into it many years ago and just never bothered to beat it. But I like it though. But I think it's the original one that I'm going to stick with. I just something about the color scheme on that one and all, and it's. I mean, the game was buggy originally, right? But a lot of the bugs have been ironed out on that one. I think I'm going to stick to that one, honestly. But either way, though, it's a pretty big game though, and it's coming out on August 11th on the Switch. Mario Kart World got an update, 1.7.0, and from what I understand about it, it adds new routes. Were added to the knockout mode. Looks like there's like a drill rally and boomerang rally, I guess, courses that were added somewhere within some of those courses. And so yeah, so that's cool. I mean, more content to that game. I feel like I feel like this game wasn't quite the hit that Nintendo wanted it to be. I feel like Nintendo really thought that this game was going to be a big hit, considering how big Mario Kart 8 is. And it's a pretty big seller for them. It's just that I think that the overall reception critically, though, has been a bit low on this one, as I don't see here too many people too excited for this game anymore. It's like, oh, an update, yay. But maybe some DLC or something, right, can really, boost up its popularity somewhere at some point. But yeah, other than that, though, like I said, right, I don't, hear too much about it though. Let's see. And so Nintendo is reportedly hiring more employees and increasing wages in Japan. Let's see. So I did take a picture on this. So let me see here. I did hear also some counter argument to this, right? So again, I don't know. Maybe this is like maybe there's more to the story, but from what I was reading here on I think it was a channel that I was, somebody was explaining it a little bit, and I just took this quick screenshot. But basically, the president of Nintendo, Shintaro Furukawa, announced the increase in pay at Nintendo's latest annual shareholder meeting. An investor noted that Nintendo doesn't have a labor union and wanted to know what the company is doing to reward its employees. Furukawa responded that he feels it's important for Nintendo to maintain an appropriate level of salary and compensation. Accordingly, the base salary at Nintendo Japan is increased by an impressive 10%. It is a bit of good news for the industry and game developers as the industry as a whole struggles with myriads of layoffs and the complete shutdown of several game studios. So, again, I feel like there's maybe more to this story because taken at face value seems like a cool thing, right? But usually there's more, right? Usually there's more to the story and all. So, but for what it is there and all, I mean, that sounds cool. But, again, I don't know. I just nowadays have very little faith in a lot of these corporations and such. But Japan does do things differently, right? I mean, it does seem that to some extent, Nintendo does try to take care of their employees, I guess, as far as like company corporations go. And I mean, which is there's a lot that you can say about Nintendo that is annoying and all for sure, but there is, I think, there is part of a reason why they are so protective of their IP. Why they try to do their best to, at least with stories like this, right, not to take care of their employees. At least from what it sounds like, right? I mean, I mean, there has been some controversy with employment before in the past. I think a few years ago there was something going on. I forgot what. So definitely not like perfect or the good guys or anything like that completely, right? As far as like how they treat their workforce and all. But at the very least, hopefully this is more true than not. Because that would be kind of cool. Again, right, with all the stuff going on in the video game industry nowadays, it kind of puts Nintendo in a position where, like, you get all things considered, you guys could kind of be like the good guys in all of this, right? Which is kind of weird to say, right? Because again, Nintendo, they're not innocent on everything, but at the very least, they're definitely not what other companies are doing at the moment. But there's been some rumors going around there that we may potentially, eventually, see Grand Theft Auto 6 on the Nintendo Switch 2. Yeah, I know. Just talking about like the fact that how is the port of Elder Scrolls Remastered going to run on the Switch too, let alone something like Grand Theft Auto 6. I feel like Grand Theft Auto 6 is like our first true look at what. Holy shit! It's kind of weird to say it, but what 10th generation games are going to look like. That's weird to say, but here's the story coming out, right? Take this with a grain of salt, though, because the dude that's posting this, so his name is Nash Weedle. I think he's from Brazil somewhere, or maybe Spain. I'm not sure, or Portugal, but he's been known to get some things right. But from what I understand, some of the things that he's gotten right is because it's been originally reported from like a more credible source. But then he's gotten a lot of things wrong. So again, take it with a grain of salt. But Grand Theft Auto. So this is a post that he made. Let's see. This would have been, when did he post this? So originally he posted this. He made a post about this on November 17th of 2025. So Leak Express, I can confirm that work is being done on a port of Grand Theft Auto 6 for the Switch 2. I hadn't spoken much about it. I had to be prudent until now. Plus, can comment that, or and then I don't know what else he posted. It doesn't show there. But anyway, that was a post that he did back then. So he retweeted that or reposted that, or what are the hosts called nowadays? But so an update on this fairly recently. Uh, so Grand Theft Auto 6 Switch 2 update. Technical hurdles have been overcome. So he kind of gives like a bullet points here. The next one is specialists in Switch 2 ports have been brought in via subcontract. They keep telling me it won't arrive this year. More insiders confirmed to me that they've also received information from their sources about this port. Excuse me. So I don't know. Do we want to believe it? I think that I think someone else too also was it Jeff Grubb or maybe Nate the Hater or somebody also kind of alluded to the same thing, right? That they've heard that there's work being done on a Switch too. Not necessarily that they're for sure that it's going to come out, but just more like I from what it sounds like, at the very least they're attempting to make it happen. Whether they can make it happen or not, we don't know, right? And then if they couldn't make it happen, I don't think that information would be released publicly. Might have to hear from leakers and such, but I think that seems to make sense. I mean, Grand Theft Auto 6 is going to be humongous, right? And so why wouldn't you want to get it on as many systems as possible? And especially because right now the Xbox sales have been, I mean, the game is doing pretty well from what I understand in pre-orders for the Xbox as far as Xbox games are concerned. But, the Xbox market, though, has shrunk considerably. And so I would think that they would want to get it on something else, right? Since especially because the PC port's not going to be ready, right away. So seems to make sense that they would want to get it on the Switch too. But I guess we'll have to wait and see on it. But from what it sounds like, if this is to be believed, it's not coming out until probably I would assume 2027. But that's crazy though. I mean, first of all, the graphics themselves, right? And then the other thing too is this game's going to be huge as far as its file size. How's that going to work on the Switch 2? I mean, it's like the Switch 2 has what 256 internal gigabytes of internal storage. I mean, I feel like it's probably going to have to use up a good considerable chunk of that. So, like on my Switch 2, I have Remake and Rebirth installed on my on the internal drive, and that takes up pretty much the majority of it right there. So, and like I said, I can imagine this game's going to be humongous. I'm going to guesstimate it's going to be close to 200 gigabytes at least. That's what I'm kind of leaning towards. Wasn't there a story that I think I covered a little while back where it was supposedly going to be like about 600 gigabytes or so? It ended up being debunked, but when I saw that, I was like, I wonder if that's the case though. But again, I think that story was debunked though. Let's see. And so the other thing too is that it seems like there's a new Switch 2 model that is being worked on. So this is coming from looks like a post that was made by Nintendo Patents Watch. So apparently it's some kind of a group of people, right, that they follow this stuff. So I'm just going to read verbatim here what they said. But a new model of Switch 2 LCD panel, most likely by Sharp, has surfaced on a Chinese resale site. Compared with the launch model from Innolux. The exposed circuit connector and cables are significantly different, indicating an updated design, not merely a minor revision. So the assumption is that if this is true, then Nintendo's coming out with a new version where perhaps they can fix some of the ghosting issues that some people have noticed. I've noticed it a bit, not to the point where it bothers me, but I have noticed it a bit, and not enough for me to say that I'm going to go out and get a new Switch 2 right for this new screen if this ends up being true. But I have noticed it a little bit, especially like on. I don't notice it too much like on 3D games, but a little bit more on 2D games. But again, it hasn't gone to the point where it's bothered me though. But yeah, but that I guess would be pretty cool though if they can resolve that issue. But probably the biggest news though, as far as Nintendo goes, and this one does have me pretty excited. And if I mean, because it seems like this is true. Okay, so actually, there's I right now just double checking my story here, and this actually seems to be more to it when it comes to Metroid. So, this actually has me even more excited now. So I'm going to read this here from Nintendo Live. I like this, guys. So let's see. So this is just posted on Wednesday, but so rumor, right? Well, actually, let me back up a little bit. Um, the original story was that so there was a patent that was filed within the countries do things differently as far as like when they get their patents, right? And within in their nation, right, for movies and games and whatnot. So that's my understanding of it. And so then somebody noticed that Nintendo of America filed a patent for a game that they're coming out with and then the Brazilian government somehow that information was seen by people, right? I don't know to what extent how that happened, but people noticed that there was that Nintendo of America patent the name Metroid Ravenous, I think, right? That's how you pronounce it. Uh, and that it was I think it said like a release for, or it was patent for 2026. I don't know like exactly like if it was just when the patent was done or if that's when it's expected to be released. That part I'm not 100% sure on, but yeah, but it seems legit though. Even leading more credentials to that is that the story broke out, and so then eventually it was removed. So that definitely leads to believe, like, oh shit, this is a new Metroid game. And so the people, that follow Nintendo news and all were running wild with the story. So again, Metroid Ravenous. And so just going from the name, right, that's all we have to go off of. What we're thinking of, because it seems to make sense, is so um, if you know anything about Metroid Dread, uh, well, that's a fairly new game, so I don't really want to like spoil things and all. But let's just say that it definitely alludes like it's a follow up to Metroid Dread. Well, I should say Metroid Dread kind of concluded Metroid from like the first Metroid, not including the Prime games, right? Because the Prime games are kind of like within that timeline, but kind of then also kind of steer off on their own thing. But like if we're talking about the 2D Metroid games, it kind of concludes the story from like Metroid, the very first one on the Nintendo, to Metroid Dread. It's sort of like its story, right? Like it's all kind of contained story. So anything that follows after that is sort of like almost like it's starting a whole new chapter. And so, but given the name though, right, it definitely seems like the events would take place after Metroid Dread, basically, I guess is what I'm getting at. So then the assumption is that it's going to be a 2.5D game, right? Kind of in the lines of Metroid Dread, and assumedly Mercury Steam is doing the development of it. That's all just speculation, right? Just given that Mercury Steam hasn't really announced anything as far as what they're doing. There was a bit of a layoffs, I think, though, that happened at that company. Unfortunately, I think I heard somewhere. But then also that they've been, Metroid. It sounds crazy to say, but Metroid Dread came out 5 years ago, almost 5 years ago, right? So assuming that they've been working on something, the timeline seems to fit that it would be about time that they would release another game, and so if that's what they've been working on. Will it come out this year? I don't know. I mean, it almost seems like it would be next year, right? And again, just the way a lot of these game companies now stagger the releases out. But one thing to consider, though, I mean, if this is true, I'm going to lean more towards that it's coming out next year. But one thing to consider though is that it is also Metroid's 40th anniversary. Nintendo never really seems to acknowledge that too much, but it is, right? So I don't know. Maybe it could come out this year. I kind of doubt it though, right? But it seems to be legit though, right? So that's the first story that broke out. So here's a follow up though to it, and again, this is coming from NintendoLife.com. So Metroid could be making a return sooner than expected after a new rating for a project known as Metroid Ravenous was recently spotted. If this wasn't enough news about the Galactic Bounty Hunter for a week, VGC's editor-in-chief Andy Robinson has now chimed in, claiming even more could be on the way. Here's what he had to say in response to reports about a new Metroid title being spotted on Brazil's rating website. More than one of these are coming, I'm told. We're eating Metroid fans. What? So let's see, to follow up on this. So although he didn't expand on what to expect, as noted by Nintendo Everything, there are already some rumors this year about a classic Metroid title getting a makeover. Of course, there's no guarantee of any of this will lead to an official announcement, so don't get too excited. But the latest rumor about Metroid followed the release of Retro Studios titled Metroid Prime 4 Beyond on the Switch and Switch 2 last year. It had an infamously drawn-out development cycle. As for the Samus side-scrolling series, the last entry was the outstanding Metroid Dread in 2021, developed by the talented team at Mercury Steam. If we hear any updates about these Metroid rumors or any other credible sources corroborate on this latest claim, we'll let you know. Okay, so I guess that's all we have to go off of is this Andy Robinson dude. Did they give more information on, I guess? Okay, so I went over to the link here, and okay, so yeah, that's all he posted on Twitter or X, or yeah, I think it's X. More than one of these are coming, I'm told. We're eating Metroid fans. Oh shit. My hope is if we get, I don't think it's going to be a 3D Metroid. I mean, those games just take longer to make. And we just had Metroid Prime 4, last December. My hope is that you give us this remake, whatever it is, of Super Metroid this year, is a shadow drop in September, when Nintendo usually does some kind of a direct. Again, they've been kind of steering away from directs, but I would think that they would still have something in September. Shadow drop there, whatever that is, because if we go back a few episodes, I talked about how there was rumors that Super Metroid could be some kind of a remake / remaster with a more pixel art style, right? So it almost seems like it's going to stick pretty close to what the original one was, but still within a pixel art style. So I don't know. I mean, I'm just speculating here, right? But maybe give it widescreen support, stick with a pixel art style, stick with mostly the same art style, but maybe, I don't know. I don't mind it too much, but maybe fix some of the jumping on it, right? Like, for example, that infamous scene where you're jumping back and forth to try to climb up this really narrow sort of vertical shaft, and maybe fix the jumping on it. Maybe put it more in line with like more modern Metroid games, and then clean up the HUD some, maybe, and things like that. But other than that, more or less keep the same game. So that'd be pretty cool, right? And we get that this year, and for celebration of Metroid's 40th anniversary. Because again, I know it usually goes unnoticed by Nintendo, but we could get that this year, and then next year give us this supposed Metroid Ravenous game, which is like a brand new 2D Metroid game, continuing the series going forward. That would be my hope. If that happens, that's going to be pretty exciting. So I don't know. I don't know to what. I mean, Video Games Chronicles. I mean, they seem to know their stuff. So I would assume, at the very least, this Andy Robinson dude is being given credible information. So I'm just going to go off of his post there. But that's very exciting. So hopefully that all comes true. Again, the Metroid Ravenous one does seem to be legit, right? That's about as legit as you can get. But at the same time, right? Just know that this is all just rumors at this point, right? but still exciting rumors, though, nonetheless. Okay, so jumping over to Xbox, and so just going to touch base a little bit on this because I feel like the story is going to get even bigger probably next week is when we're going to learn more about what ultimately ends up coming of this. But so we've already talked about how Ninja Theory, Compulsion Games, and Double Fine seem to be on the chopping block when it comes to these layoffs that are supposedly going to happen here soon. Well, now we can add Arcane Studios, and so I believe there were developers that did the Dishonored games. I believe back in the day, they also did that Redfall game that came out some years ago that kind of bombed. But then they're also were working on this Blade game, right, for Marvel, and it seems like so the reports are that the studio is going to get canned, and then Blade also as well. If that happens, that's highly unfortunate. I was really looking forward to a Blade game, and I mean, the first initial concept trailer that they showed, I mean, it seemed cool, um, but yeah, and so leading to that, the speculation is that on July 6th is when these layoffs are going to happen or get announced. And from what it sounds like, what people in the industry are reporting on is that it's going to be an absolute bloodbath, meaning that it's going to, I mean, people are speculating that it's going to be the biggest layoffs in video game history. And so basically, we're entering into new territory here, guys. I mean, when it comes to video games. And so the Xbox, what we know of it, and granted, the Xbox has probably needed a change, right? But oh man, it looks like it's gonna be a fucking bloodbath, as far as like layoffs and all. And I like I've talked about before, right? My heart always goes to like the people, in the trenches, right? Like the developers or of any job of any sort, right? And all the people in the trenches and all, because they're just if it's like pretty much any other job, right? They're the people that they're just trying to do their work, trying to make a living of some sort and get by, right? But because of decisions that get made from the higher ups, and all, it's that didn't maybe necessarily need to be made, it screws people's lives up. Now, on one end, you can hear an argument as and all is that people in top management or corporate CEOs and all that are the ones that provide the jobs. But at the same time, there's some of their choices really fuck with people's lives. And so that's the thing that a lot of times I have issues with and all. Um, but it sounds like it's going to be quite the big story next week. So assuming if I'm on track with my podcast, I'll try to cover that next week because that's the thought is that on July 6th. So it's kind of eerie and foreboding on what's to come. But here's hoping that I guess whatever happens, right? they have some kind of an outlet, right, and all to continue getting on, get back on their feet and all, because it sounds like it's going to be bad. So because they've already been talking about how Compulsion Games is already, they haven't announced it officially, right, that they're let go, but they've already been talking about how like management there and all has already been showing some of their employees like how to get a new job or something to that effect. I think I read once where, so it's something's happening, it seems like, and it seems like Asha Sharma, I mean, it makes sense, right? That she was brought in not necessarily to try to fix what's there, but basically just burn it to the ground and try to revive it to some extent, right? And that could potentially be selling it off, right? We were talking about that, a few weeks too. Also, it's not going to be pretty. So, hopefully everyone's bracing themselves for that. Specifically, the people that are going to be actually directly affected by it and all. But then that kind of leads into PlayStation stuff. So I'm not going to talk too much about it here, but just go over a few quick stories here. And the reason for this is that I made a separate video, just posted it up a little while ago. And so where I'm talking about the big story that came out this past week where Sony had announced that it's removing, they made a big announcements. And one of them first started off that they're removing movies that were published, I guess, by Studio Canal. And that was quite a bit of movies on there. I mean, everything from like Terminator 2 to Rambo and some other big hits. Completely getting rid of them. Even if you have them saved on your hard drive or whatever, they're completely removing it from your library. So that was the first thing. The second thing that they announced, and the big one, was that they've announced that after January 2028, they're no longer producing physical games. And so not only just for first-party games, but just any game going to the PlayStation is the way I understand the story going forward after that. So that was huge, right? And like I said, I felt like I needed to make a whole other video on it, so it's there on my YouTube channel if you wanted to watch it. And then the other thing too also is that the PlayStation 3 and the PlayStation Vita stores are going to be closing as well too. And so in certain areas, Mexico, Honduras, and Nicaragua, I think, in next month in August, and then and I forgot in other regions later on, and then eventually in here in the United States, I think around next year. So it's when it's around this time next year when they're finally closing. So that was a three-punch combo there that Sony hit us with, and like I said, it's a big story. I felt I had to do a whole other video on it, but that's unfortunate, right? Even as someone that mainly has been buying digital games, I kind of go more into detail on that on my other video and previous stuff that I've talked about. But I can definitely see the impact of that just because we're like I said before, we're going into a new era here, and this is not just with video games. We're entering in an era where companies just want to keep you consuming and getting the next thing, consuming, getting the next thing. Part of the magic of being able to own something, right, is where you have a sense of ownership, so meaning that you can go back and revisit it. That's not good though for a lot of companies because if you're just playing old games, you're not really moving forward with new stuff. And that's a problem for a lot of people, right? Which is why you see like this a bunch of subscriptions out there and for everything. Like I was hearing like you have to pay a damn subscription to have like a self start on your fucking key fob for a car. I was like, what the hell is that all about, right? And so I think that my speculation, right? But I think that the whole Netflix thing kind of killed things a lot because I think what people might have been noticing is like CEOs and all is when people have subscriptions to something, it seems cheap, right? $5, $10, $15 here. But then you subscribe to a lot of things. And then eventually it gets to the point where people aren't paying attention to what they've subscribed to. And so then it's just like a continuous stream of money for these companies. And now, granted, people should be responsible for their finances for sure, but I think it's also taking advantage of just like people too, and that's what I'm never a big fan of. There, when things can be a little deceptive and all, and and then especially when they start putting things that are you know like things that you never really had to pay for, but now you're putting it behind the paywall of some sort. It's highly annoying, right? And yeah. Anyways, it's just a direction that we're moving forward with, right, in this world. And so just be smart with your money, pay attention to what's going out there, what you're getting charged for, and because they're definitely so many businesses are changing their business models to take advantage of that. You forget ultimately what you're paying for and all that. You're not looking between the lines, right? So stop and think about things, look what you're paying for, right? Find ways to cut back on your expenses and all because I mean businesses have never, I mean they'll never be there. Why would they, right? Why would they ever be on the consumer side, right? So it is up to us to really be vigilant about these things and all, and especially because things are changing nowadays as far as how businesses are ran, that we just have to be more educated and just be vigilant, right, on these kind of things. But anyways, a little bit of a side tangent there and all. I go into it more on that video that I made, but it's definitely a big story and has sent a lot of frustration throughout the video game industry. So yeah, highly unfortunate that happened.
Let's now get into it, though, with our game that we'll be discussing this week, and that is for Tomb Raider. So Tomb Raider, featuring Lara Croft, is an early 3D game that it wasn't the first overall 3D game that was out there, but it was one of the first, though, that really felt like they had a good sense of what it is to maneuver through a 3D space. Now, Super Mario 64 had come out a few months before this game, and that game revolutionized, the video game industry. But this one also kind of pushed it forward too, in that sense, as again, you're a 3D character in a 3D environment. And so meaning that came with a whole lot of new sets of rules and gameplay mechanics and just an overall feel of a game, right? That, 2D and 3D games have their strengths and weaknesses. But one thing that I feel like 3D games can typically get a little bit better when done right is that this sense of like being in a virtual space. Obviously you have the 3D graphics, and also you can, stop, pan the camera around, look at your overall environment in the 3D world. And it truly made it feel like it was a sense of almost like being in virtual reality without actually being in virtual reality. And at the time, again, because these games were really new to us, it truly gave this sense of immersion that for many gamers we hadn't really experienced before. And not only that, it helped out too also that the lead character, Lara Croft, who she's sort of become kind of the leading lady when it comes to video games. As I mean, there's been a handful of female protagonists, right, that you can say that about, and Lara Croft is definitely towards the top, at least for this early stretch here, as she's lost some popularity in the years to come. But with her recent announcement, right, of the new games that she's coming out with, that could put her back on the top there. But I would say that I feel like at least up to a certain point, each generation had sort of like a character that sort of helped define that generation. So for example, for me in the second generation, it was Pac-Man. The third generation, it was Mario Brothers. The fourth generation, I feel like it could have gone to Sonic the Hedgehog. And then for the fifth generation, I got to give it to Lara Croft here for Tomb Raider. I think she exemplified a lot of what this generation was, where again, we're going into 3D, and then also that she's exploring tombs, right? And all, which kind of is sort of like a metaphor for we're exploring world in a 3D space, right? At least that's the way I kind of took it back then, and even to this day here. And this game is a bit rough around the edges now, and if you were to go back and play it now, but at the time it was truly revolutionary, and so I wanted to shine a spotlight on it here and give one of the first leading ladies of video games time to shine here in this little retrospective that I do. And so, kind of like we've done before, just go over some information on here, my personal experience with the game, a little bit of a review, and just overall thoughts, right? And as far as the game itself, and then just the legacy that it left behind. So let's see. So for Tomb Raider, so it was a 1996 action-adventure game developed by Core Design and published by Eidos Interactive as a debut entry in the Tomb Raider media franchise. Because this game eventually would just... there was a lot of sequels that spawned after this one, right after the other. And so it was one of those game series and all where they just like, they struck gold, they kept at it though, right? And then they kind of tired everyone out, right, with the formula. But initially though, it was pretty exciting to play this. So it was first released on the Sega Saturn, followed shortly by the version for MS-DOS and the PlayStation. So this is something that is not, I mean, I felt like it was commonly known, but again, this is, I was from this era here, and so maybe people nowadays and all might have not known this as well, but a lot of times it's assumed, right, that Tomb Raider started on the PlayStation, but it was actually on the Sega Saturn, and they're probably going to get into it here in a bit, but I want to say I think that the main dude that one of the main developers of this game, Toby Gard, from what I understand back then, and this is going from the magazines back then, is that he was a big fan of Sega. And so then the Sega Saturn had come out, and so they eventually, so he wanted it on the Sega Saturn, because Core Designs, them and Sega had a pretty good relationship, because they had published several games for the Sega CD, everything from like H3, Thunderstrike, Wonder Dog, Battle Corp, and I believe the Chuck Rock games. And so, they had a pretty healthy relationship from what I can tell. And so he was a fan of the Sega Saturn, and that's what he wanted it on. But, as we've talked already before in previous retrospectives that I've done, the Sega Saturn just wasn't, meeting sales expectations, and the PlayStation was just blowing up. So from what I understand, and they'll probably get into it more here, is that it's almost like Eidos Interactive or maybe Core Design, one or the other, right? And they were kind of forced to put it on the PlayStation. It's sort of my understanding, right? But we'll see if it gets into it more here. Let's see. The later release came out for the Mac OS in 1999, the Pocket PC in 2002, the N-Gage, if anybody remembers that, in 2003, iOS in 2013 and Android in 2015. Huh. I didn't know it was on those. But the game follows archaeologist adventurer Lara Croft, who is hired by businesswoman Jacqueline Natla to find an architect called the Scion of Atlantis. Gameplay features Lara navigating levels split into multiple areas and room complexes while fighting enemies and solving puzzles to progress. The initial concept was created by Toby Gard, who is credited for Lara's creator and worked as lead artist on the project. Production began in 1994, and it took 18 months with a budget of 440 euros, I believe is what it means there. The character was based on several influences, including Tank Girl, Indiana Jones, and Hard Boiled. The 3D-based level design, innovative for its time, was inspired by the structure of Egyptian tombs. The music was composed by Nathan McCree, who took inspiration from English classical music. Originally announced in 1995, the title went into receive extensive press attention and heavy promotion from Eidos Interactive. An expansion pack subtitled Unfinished Business was released in 1997, containing new standalone levels. Tomb Raider was praised for its innovative 3D graphics, controls, and gameplay. The game went on to win several industry awards and is considered to be one of the greatest video games ever made. So it's funny, some of the games that I've picked on this, it's had that link right there, right? Where it's like the greatest video games ever made. So I would put it more under, and again, part of the games that I've been selecting on this, right? Maybe not the greatest game, but one of the most influential games, right? But at the time, though, right, like I said, it was really well received. It was also one of the best-selling games for the PlayStation, with 7 million units sold worldwide, and it remained the best-selling title in the Tomb Raider franchise until 2013's reboot. Lara Croft herself became a cultural icon, rising to prominence as one of the game's most recognizable characters. Following the game's success, numerous sequels were released beginning with Tomb Raider 2 in 1987. 2 remakes have been developed, with Tomb Raider Anniversary and the upcoming Tomb Raider Legacy of Atlantis, which is set to release in 2027. A remastered version of Tomb Raider, alongside Unfinished Business, was released as a part of the Tomb Raider 1, 2, 3 remastered in 2024. Wait, what? Unfinished Business? I'm going to have to double check that, because I have that version. I guess I haven't noticed it? Okay. But gameplay. So Tomb Raider is an action-adventure video game in which the player assumes the role of archaeologist adventurer Lara Croft, who navigates through a series of ancient ruins and tombs in search of an ancient artifact. The game is split into 4 zones. So you go to Peru, Greece, Egypt, and the lost island of Atlantis. I think that's one of the reasons why this remains one of my favorite Tomb Raider games. It's just because I guess I'm a fan of the concept of, and the mystery behind like the city of Atlantis. So anything that has to do with that, right, I'm always a bit intrigued by. And so I think this is why this one has kind of stuck out, right, as, not this particular version, not my favorite Tomb Raider game, but the overall concept, the setting and everything, it has been my favorite Tomb Raider game for that reason there. But a training level set in Lara's home of Croft Manor can be accessed from the start menu. The game is presented in third-person perspective. Lara is always visible, and the camera follows the action by focusing on Lara's shoulders by default, but the player can take manual control of the camera to get a better look at the area. That was revolutionary back then, right? And again, that's what I'm trying to stress here, right? That when we first played this game, it was truly a big deal, right? Where we're like, oh, so we can go anywhere we want, and I can push a button, and then I'm like looking all over my environment. And then eventually that made us realize, like, oh, and I can do this to solve, that helps to solve some of the puzzles. And so it's like our little brains, right, were being stretched out as we were trying to acknowledge how to control in a 3D space. Because again, remember, our brains are so ingrained in controlling 2D games. And so this is sort of like a new venture, right? And I just remember it's one of the things that I used to love doing in this game is just going up to an edge, when I'm kind of high up, and then just holding the button that lets you look around, and you're just going to look up, down, left, right, and everywhere. And so it was truly, it was mind-blowing right at the time. Let's see. Where did I leave off here? The game automatically switches to different camera view at key points, either to give the player a wider look of a new area or to add a cinematic effect. In the Sega Saturn and PlayStation versions, players save their progress in a level using save crystals, while the PC version, the player can save at any point. If Lara dies, the player must restart from a previous save. Oh, lucky PC players. So the object of Tomb Raider is to guide Lara through a series of tombs and other locations in search of treasures and artifacts. On the way, she must kill dangerous animals and creatures while collecting objects and solving puzzles. The emphasis lies on exploring, solving puzzles, and navigating Lara's surroundings to complete each level. Movement in the game is varied and allows for complex interactions with the environments. In addition to standard movement using tank controls, Lara can walk, jump over gaps, shimmy along edges, and swim through bodies of water. Certain opponent combinations allow Lara to perform a handstand from a hanging position or execute a swan dive. So yeah, so kind of like Resident Evil, uses tank controls too. So again, it basically means that regardless of the direction that you're facing, up will always move you forward. Well, I should say, yeah, up is always going to move you forward. Back is going to make you like back up, right? So like she's not going to turn around and go in the opposite direction and so forth. Because I remember this in Tomb Raider, or I'm sorry, yeah, Resident Evil and Tomb Raider, they definitely, it wasn't, eventually controls would become more fluid, more smoother, more intuitive and all, but it was their attempt, right, of trying to control in a 3D space. My thought, I don't know this for sure, maybe they'll get into it here later, but I think it's just what made most sense, right, when trying to control a 3D character with the knowledge that they had at the time. Again, nowadays, like, for example, if you play that remastered version of Tomb Raider, it has controls where, it's more like what 3D games are nowadays, right? Where if I move in a direction, she's going to move in that direction. But again, this is what they had to work with back then. I will say, though, that with Tomb Raider, because it had these kind of controls, and it's almost like everything is grid based, right? Like it's kind of like you have to almost think like in square, right? And even though the controls change eventually in 3D games, it really helped me understand controlling a character in a 3D space. Like I knew that if I made her jump back, I was going to go, it was exactly so much space on the screen that I was going to jump back. And then when I moved forward and then pressed a jump button, like I knew exactly when I had to hit the jump button so that I could reach out to the ledge, because it was all like very kind of like, it's kind of weird to explain, but like if you've never played it before, but sort of like the movements were sort of like boxed in a way where, it's almost like I completely understood that. I was like, if I do this, this is going to happen. And then the complexity of the moves, right? Like, for example, doing like a long jump, right? So you stand at the edge of a ledge, you push back to make her hop back, and then you push forward to make her start running. You're holding it. And then right before you hit the ledge, you press a jump button. And if I recall right, you press a jump button, and then I think you have to press another button so that she hangs on the ledge in front of her, right? So the complex of button prompts and all that, it took me a bit to realize that, but then once I got the hang of it, in my mind, I was kind of thinking like, this is sort of like the game Flashback from back in the day, right? If you've never played that, it was sort of like dependent on specific button prompts, right, to do these complex maneuvers. But once you got the hang of it, though, and all, it truly, the character truly felt like almost an extension of yourself. And then it, like I said, it really started opening up our eyes to like the possibility of like 3D gaming, right? Because there's just more that you can do in complex movements and all in a 3D space. And then eventually, yeah, you can shimmy along ledges and then swan dive and all those are just like extra bonuses and all. But once you kind of mastered the way she jumps around and all, it truly started making you understand the game. And almost like, it's kind of a weird comparison, but you almost became like Neo, when, in the Matrix, where you start seeing, like, almost like you can see like the code in the game, right? You're like, oh, okay, I get this, right? And at least that's the way I really appreciated this game back then, right? And it took me a bit, like I said, right, to master the controls. But once I did, it just became second nature, and became just a lot of fun to play. But Lara has two basic stances, one with weapons drawn out and one with hands-free. When her weapons are drawn, she automatically locks to any nearby targets. Locking onto nearby enemies prevents her from performing other actions which require her hands, such as grabbing onto ledges and prevent falling. By default, she carries two pistols with infinite ammo. Additional weapons include shotgun, dual magnums, dual Uzis. A general action button is used to perform wide range of movement, such as picking up items, pulling switches, firing guns, pushing or pulling blocks, and grabbing onto ledges. So those were some other complex movements there, right? And all that, again, became second nature after a while. But items to pick up included ammo, small and large medipacks, keys, artifacts required to complete a stage. Any item that is collected is held onto Lara's inventory until it is used. Throughout each stage, one or more secrets may be located. Discovering these secrets is optional, and when the player finds a tune plays. And when the player finds one, a tune plays. Oh my god! The locations of each of these secrets vary in difficulty to reach. The player is usually rewarded with an extra items. Yeah, so there's so many secrets in the game, right? And then at the end of the level, it lets you know like you found 1 out of 3 secrets or 3 out of 3 secrets. And Tomb Raider was one of the first games that I remember trying to 100%. At least what was, I guess, considered that back then. As I don't think I ever did. I think there was like 1 or 2 levels that I couldn't find all the secrets on. Because again, I back then I didn't use any walkthrough or anything. I just played this game a lot. But I do remember. I'm not much of a 100%er in the game, but there was a handful of games that did want me to try to get everything in it, and Tomb Raider was definitely one of the earlier ones that made me want to do that. But the plot. So archaeologist adventure Lara Croft is approached by a mercenary named Larson who is working for businesswoman Jacqueline Natla. Natla hires Lara to acquire the Scion, a mysterious artifact buried in the tomb of Qualopec, situated near Vilcabamba within the Peruvian Andes. After recovering the Scion from Qualopec's tomb, Lara is ambushed by Larson, who reveals after his defeat, after she is holding merely a piece of the artifact. And Natla has sent rival treasure hunter Pierre Dupont to retrieve the other pieces. And we'll leave it there, so that way we don't go into spoilers on this. Excuse me. So here we go. So development of this game. So the initial concept for Tomb Raider was designed by Toby Gard, who worked for Core Design, a game development studio based in Derby, England, that had established itself developing titles for home computers and Sega consoles. It was proposed by Gard to company head Jeremy Heath Smith during the 1994 brainstorming session for the game concepts for the then upcoming PlayStation console. The entire staff approved, and Heath Smith gave Gard permission to start the project once he finished work on BC Racers for the Sega CD. The game concept was created before anything else, with the main hooks being its cinematic presentation and being a 3D character-driven experience. Gard worked with Paul Douglas on fleshing out the concept and design and doing pre-production for 6 months, before the team expanded to 6 people, including programmers Gavin Rimmery and Jason Gosling, and level designer artist Neil Boyd and Heather Gibson. The team wanted to mix adventure style of Ultima Underworld and the 3D character shown off in Virtua Fighter. So again, if you go back a few retrospectives, I mentioned on there that Toby Gard was heavily inspired by Virtua Fighter when we did our little retrospective on that. So just the impact of that game. But the team kept the project deliberately simple and comparatively modest in scope, within its development budget of being approximately 440,000 euros. The production atmosphere was fairly informal. Development began in 1994 and lasted 18 months. The team endured extensive overtime and crunch during the last stages. During production, Core Design was sold to Centra Gold, which in turn was purchased by Eidos Interactive in May of 1996, who became publisher for the title. When Toby Gard first presented the idea for the game, the concept art featured a male lead who strongly resembled Indiana Jones. Heath Smith asked for a change for legal reasons. When Gard created the initial design document, he decided to give the player a choice of genders and created a female adventurer alongside a male character. Once he realized creating and animating 2 playable characters would require double the design work, he decided to slim back down to 1. The female character, originally named Lara Cruz, and so Lara spelled the more traditional way, Laura, and then Cruz, Cruz, was his favorite, so he discarded the male character before developing work. After Eidos became the game's publisher, they unsuccessfully lobbied for a selectable male lead. Speaking about his approach to the concept, Gard noted that he deliberately went against publisher trends when designing both the character and gameplay. Lara went through several changes before the developer settled on the final version, including the name to Lara Croft, so Lara and then Croft, after Eidos executives in the United States objected to the original name. The inspirations for the character Lara Croft included the character Tank Girl, the Indiana Jones series titular lead, and the John Woo film Hard Boiled. I'm assuming Hard Boiled because of the dual wielding guns. But Lara's notably exaggerated physical proportions were a deliberate choice by Guard, as he wanted a caricatured personification of women who could be an action icon for the younger generation. So basically, to get a bunch of horny teens, right, to be able to play this game, I think is kind of what they were going for. See, from the game's earliest stages, the team wanted the title to involve tombs and pyramids. In the early story draft, Lara would be confronted by a rival group called the Chaos Raiders. During the Greece levels, Lara and Pierre would have been less hostile rivals, helping each other with puzzles in the first level. Larson evolved from an African's character called Lars Kruger, who shared similar roles in the original plot. The script itself was written by Vicky Arnold, who joined in 1995 and would work on later Tomb Raider games. Guard and Douglas created the basic story draft alongside the initial game design, and then Arnold turned it into a script after joining the project. It was Arnold's job to write the dialogue and create a cohesive narrative around the locations selected by team members. While Lara Croft's design and Guard's initial concept were present, much of the additional detail was worked out by Arnold. The platforming design drew extensively from Prince of Persia, with the doppelganger enemy during the Atlantis section being an homage to the Shadow Prince from that game. So again, the movement very much like Flashback, right? The game I mentioned earlier, the 2D side-scrolling game that was on the Amiga, I believe, and on the Sega Genesis, and you mentioned Super Nintendo. But that game itself was inspired by Prince of Persia, right? So you're going to see some similarities in the movement, within these games. Even, obviously Tomb Raider's 3D and the other ones are 2D, but there's still certain similar styles as far as their overall control. But the high number of animal enemies was meant to ground players in the world before the more fantastical elements appeared, in addition to being easier to animate and program than human enemies. The staff was also uncomfortable with Lara killing that many humans. The initial concept gave combat prominence, but as production began, the focus shifted to platforming and puzzle solving. A plan that made it into the final production was using enemy placement to shift the atmosphere from pure action adventure to horror-like tone. The harder areas, including the Palace Midas level, which is an excellent level, the instant death traps, have been attributed to Boyd. The team consciously set the story in real archaeological locations representing several cultures. Boyd and Gibson immersed themselves in literature and history about each culture for the first three areas, respectively inspired by the Inca Empire, the classical Greece, and ancient Egypt. The Greece levels were put in after planned levels in Angkor Wat, Cambodia were dropped. The Craft Manor training level was built by Guard over a weekend. Wow. Its design was based on pictures from the Gregorian Manor house taken from an unspecified reference book. Interesting. So design and platform. So the title was developed for the Sega Saturn, MS-DOS personal computers, and PlayStation, with all three versions in development simultaneously. Gosling led programming for the Sega Saturn version. Douglas describes the game code for each title as identical, with an additional layer of specific coding to tailor the game for each platform. While Sony Europe approved the game early on, making Tomb Raider one of the earliest approved third-party products for the PlayStation, Sony America initially rejected the game's concept and asked for more and better content. Douglas blamed the response on core design, submitting Tomb Raider too early in production. In response, the development team made several changes to the game design documentation and provided a version on Sony hardware, which would lead to worldwide approval by Sony. For the Saturn version, Sega negotiated a timed exclusive deal in Europe, meaning the Saturn version was released in that region ahead of other versions. Core Designs and Sega made the deal during the last months of development, so that the team had to finish up the Saturn version 6 weeks earlier than they had planned, forces them to work even longer hours. Wow. Okay, so maybe what I read in the magazines back then was wrong. that it was originally planned on the Sega Saturn. So let's see. So following the release of the Saturn version, the number of bugs were discovered that affected all versions of the game because of the timed exclusivity. The development team fixed these bugs for the PlayStation and PC versions. Two notable surviving bugs in all versions were the corner bug, which allowed players to scale architecture by jumping repeatedly against a corner, and a bug which caused the game not to recognize the collection of a secret in the final level. Interesting. In 1997, Core Designs opened negotiations with Nintendo to release a Nintendo 64 version of the game, and started work on the port in anticipation of the negotiations being successful. The planning began. The planning took place between 1996 and 1997, with Douglas wanting to redesign the game mechanics to incorporate the platform's analog stick controls. The team never received Nintendo 64 development kits, and the port was scrapped when Sony finalized the deal to keep subsequent Tomb Raider games exclusive to PlayStation until the year 2000. So I'm thinking maybe what it was. Maybe back then the confusion was not so much that they were wanting to get the game on the Sega Saturn first, but maybe more that the Sega Saturn had the exclusivity deal. But I do remember that reading from Game Fan back then. But then again, Die Hard Game Fan magazine was kind of a bullshitters too. Also, I haven't done an episode in a while, but I was kind of going through some of the old Game Fan magazines, and if you listen to any of those, right at all, there's some stories there on just how bit hyperboreal that magazine was, and they tended to be a bit Sega biased too as well. So third-person 3D action adventure like Tomb Raider was unprecedented at the time, and the development team took several months to find a way to make Guard's vision for the game work on the hardware of the time, in particular getting the player character to interact with freeform environments. Tomb Raider used a custom-built game engine, as in many games of the era. The engine was designed and built by Douglas with assistance from Rumory. Rumory created the level editor, which allowed for seamless creation of levels. According to Rumory, the design to build a game on a grid was the key breakthrough in making the game possible. Okay, so that's kind of what I was talking about earlier, right? It's like everything is in a grid, and also kind of like in square. It's like if you think in squares in this game, right? As far as like the length of your jumps and your movement overall, and then that's kind of amplified by the 10 controls as well too. Let's see. Its core design's contention that prior to the development of Tomb Raider, they were struggling somewhat with 32-bit development. Lara's movements were hand animated and coordinated rather than using motion capture. The reason for this was that the team wanted uniformly in her movement, which was not possible with motion capture technology at the time. Yeah, I can imagine, because the game is kind of rigid and structured in a certain specific movements, right, within her environment. So I can imagine that would have been difficult with the more fluidity, right, of motion capture. But the letter editor program was designed so that developers could make rapid adjustments to specific areas with ease. Another noted aspect was the multi-layered levels as compared to the equivalent 3D action-adventure games of the time, which were mostly limited to flat floor system with little verticality. The interlinking room design was inspired by Egyptian multi-room tombs, particularly the tomb of Tutankhamun. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but the grid-based pattern was a necessity due to the D-pad-based tank controls and the Saturn's quad polygon-based rendering technology. Okay. So maybe that's sort of where some of those rumors were coming about, right? That the Saturn was preferred originally. So levels were first designed using a wireframe construction, with each area of this stage having only links to other areas of a level and walls. The team area at this stage having only links to other areas of a level and walls. Wait, what? Oh my god, I'm not reading this right. So the team then added architecture and gameplay elements like traps and enemies, then implemented the different lighting values. Due to the time and technical limitations, planned outdoor areas had to be cut. The choice of a third-person perspective was influenced by the team's opinion that the game type was underrepresented when compared to first-person shooters such as Doom. So yeah, because we started getting a wave of like first-person shooters, right? Doom, Doom 2, Duke Nukem, I believe, what was it? Hexen, and there was a handful of other ones. But the third-person view meant multiple enemies were difficult to implement, including the character and camera control. The camera had 4 preset angles which seamlessly switched depending on the character's position and the level progress. For standard navigation and combat, the camera was fixed on a particular point and oriented around Lara while focusing on that object. Lara's twin pistol setup was in place from the early prototypes. The aiming design was the aiming system was designed so that each gun arm had an aiming axis with a shared sweet spot where both guns fired at the same target. For underwater environments, the effects were created using Gurroud shading to create real-time ripple and lighting effects. So yeah, Gurroud shading, I remember that was sort of like the... what were the terms back then? It was Gurroud shading and I think light sourcing. And so what that was, from what I recall, was Gurroud shading is sort of like where and the Sega Saturn couldn't really do this that well as opposed to the PlayStation, and that's where you saw the majority of the graphical changes. So I'm gonna see if I can place like a bit of a graphical comparison between the two versions here. So if my editing skills allow, if not, I might just post pictures of it. But basically, Gurroud shading is where it knocked my microphone down, where it sort of like gave a way of shading the polygons so that it looked more 3D, with the natural shading and lighting around the polygon. So for example, if you're looking at a sphere and you can see pretty seamlessly, like a good artist, right? If you're shading like a sphere, right? If a good artist knows what they're doing, they're going to shade it in a way where it blends the light and the dark part of it, right? And so the PlayStation could do that pretty well. Hence, Gurroud shading more or less is what it's considered. Actually, instead of me just trying to explain this, let me just kind of go over here and click on this here. So Gurroud shading, named after Henry Gurroud, is a interpolation method used in computer graphics to produce continuous shading of surfaces represented by polygon meshes. In practice, Gurroud shading is most often used to achieve continuous light to triangle meshes by computing the lighting at the corners of each triangle and linearly interpolating the results colors for each pixel covered by the triangle. Gurroud first published the technique in 1971. However, enhanced hardware support for superior shading models that has yielded Gurroud shading largely obsolete in modern rendering. All right, there you go. Better than I can explain it. But yeah, and so then coupled with like light sourcing, which is sort of like where they're able to like manipulate light, right? So for example, like if there's like a light beaming down on something, right, and all, then it can like, or like if there's like a spotlight for, moving across a wall, right? Like the surface reflect, can illuminate that in a way that looks fairly realistic, at least for the time. And again, that's something else that the Sega Saturn struggled. Probably the best example of all this is like when you go underwater in Tomb Raider, right? In the Sega Saturn version, I mean, I remember when I first saw it in the Sega Saturn, I was like, oh, that's pretty cool, right? I was like, okay. But then when I saw it on the PlayStation version, I was like, oh shit, that looks considerably a lot more, maybe not necessarily realistic, because it was still kind of like a stylized look, but definitely more convincing, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at. But let's see. So the audio. So the music for Tomb Raider was composed by Nathan McCree, who at the time was an in-house composer for core design. The main inspiration behind the score for McCree was English classical music. The approach was directly influenced by his conversations with Guard about Lara's character. Based on this, he kept the main theme simple and melodic. Melodic? So fucking funny. Oh my god. Molodic. Okay, God, I can't pronounce shit today. Melodic. It's funny. Okay, enough with the toilet humor. The main theme used 4-note motif, which continues to appear through the series. The piece where the deaths unfold, used when Lara is swimming underwater, was a choral work. They did not have the space or budget for live music recording, which was challenging for McCree, as he needed to create the whole thing using synthesizers. To make the choir sound realistic, he inserted recordings of himself breathing at the right points so it sounded like an actual choir. Interesting. For each track, McCree got a basic description of where the music would be used, then was left to create it. There was no time for rewrite, so each track was included in the game as first composed. Wow. So unlike most other games at the time, there was not a musical track playing consistently throughout the game. Instead, limited musical cues would play only during specifically selected moments to produce a dramatic effect. For the majority of the game, the only audio heard is action-based effects, atmospheric sounds, and Laura's own grunts and sighs, all of which were enhanced because they did not have to compete with music. According to McCree, the game was scored this way because he was allotted very little time for the job, forcing him to quickly write pieces without any thought to where they would go in the game. When the soundtrack was finally applied, developers found that the tunes worked best when applied to specific places. The symphonic sounds were created using Roland's Corporation's orchestral expansion board for their JV series keyboards. Interesting. And, and ultimately, I think it worked in her favor because one of the things that I really liked about Tomb Raider was with kind of like the same with a lot of like Metroidvania games is this sense of isolation. Yes, at some points you do get to interact with some human characters, but that's really limited. And I mean, there's moments where you're guiding Laura through like these really expansive caverns and tombs and jungles and whatnot, and it has a sense of like almost foreboding isolation, loneliness to it, sort of like what made the Metroid games really popular. And that's one of the things that I remember I really enjoyed about the atmosphere of this game, right? And yeah, then the music helped a lot with that because you're just kind of exploring a space, right? It's all silent, it's just all your sound effects and all, and then all of a sudden the music kind of tenses up a lot and you're like, oh shit, there's some kind of a enemy around the corner, right? And or if you enter into a new area and then all of a sudden this little song motif, right, that I should be playing in the background here starts playing and you're like, oh wow, you got like the sense of awe and wonder. And I felt that it was used to really good for a pretty good effect. So it's kind of interesting that the way that it was sort of wasn't necessarily planned that way, but I feel like it worked in its favor anyways. But let's see. But going with the voice acting here, so the English voice actress Shelley Bond provided the voice of Laura. She was given the job after her agent had called and had her record some audition lines onto a tape. She felt under a lot of pressure at the time as Core Design had spent 3 months searching for the right voice. She recalled, I was asked to perform her voice in a very plain, non-emotive manner and in a female Bond type of way. I would have added more inflection, tone, and emotion to my voice, but they wanted to keep it how they felt it should sound, which was quite right. My job was to bring their character to life. And let's see. And according to Blonde, she spent 4 to 5 hours recording the voice for Lara Croft, including grunts, cries, and other effects and death sounds. A different account attributes these sounds to Gibson, Core Design's PR manager Susie Hamilton, and sound designer Martin Iverson, whose voice pitch was made higher. Blonde would not return any of these would not return for any subsequent entries. In a 2011 interview, Blonde stated that her departure was due to disagreeing with some other things within Core Designs and Eidos. But 5 years later, she said that she was asked to reprise a role, but had to decline due to other commitments. Some things. That doesn't sound right. She gave permission for her effort voice work to be reused while the character's dialogue would be voiced by Judith Gibbons. Oh, interesting. But yeah, I felt that was part of Laura's sort of like coolness to it, right? Where she's very, when you're playing as Laura, right? She comes across as just a very confident person, very capable person, and just someone that, she's quite the badass, right? And so you're like, okay, she knows what she's doing. She's got this, right? And even though it was her first game, you definitely got the feeling like she was a seasoned adventurer, right? That could take on any challenge. And I think that's what made her so appealing, right? Regardless of your gender, right? She was just a cool character to control. But releases and versions. So Tomb Raider was first confirmed in 1995, although details were kept scarce by the developers. There was little attention from the press until a demo was run at the 1996 Electronics Entertainment Expo, causing the press and public to pay more attention. There was a huge amount of publicity, much of which did not involve the core design team at all, which prompted mixed feeling. While the scale of the game's eventual popularity was not in the teens' mind, its strong reception at the game's events hinted that it would be a success. To help promote the game, Eidos hired models to portray Lara Croft at trade events. The first they hired was Natalie Cook, but apparently due to her unsuitability with Eidos cross-media plans for the character, she was replaced by Rona Mitra in 1997. Mitra served as Lara's model until 1998. They also organized a large press event during August-based around explorable notable Egyptian archaeological sites. An event its organizer Susie Hamilton being amazed that they were able to make it work. Oh God, bit of a tongue twister there for me. So the game was first realized, Jesus Christ, let me back up. All right. In my defense, I just kind of woke up. All right, but let's see. The game was first released for the Saturn in Europe on 24th of October of 1996. In North America, the Saturn, PlayStation, and MS-DOS versions were released simultaneously on the 14th of November. Okay, that's right. So it was in Europe that it was okay. So in Europe, the PlayStation and MS-DOS versions were released on the 22nd of November. Future PC patches allowed the game to work on Windows 95. The PC version was released on Steam on the 29th of November of 2012. Due to a bug, the PC version came without in-game music. The PlayStation and Saturn versions were also published in Japan in 1997 by Victor Interactive Software under the name Tomb Raiders. The Saturn version was released on the 14th of January, while the PlayStation version came out on the 14th of February. In 1997, 4 new levels were released in an expansion pack for the Windows version known under the title Tomb Raider Unfinished Business. The expansion pack also came with promotional materials for the game's sequel, Tomb Raider 2. In 1998, the levels were made available as downloadable content for the Windows release, and a budget version was released on the 20th of March containing both the original game and the original levels under the title Tomb Raider Gold. Production on these new levels was led by Phil Campbell, a newcomer who was transferred to core design after another project was canceled. The 2 new areas were dubbed Unfinished Business, set within the ruins of Atlantean Pyramid, and Shadow of the Cap, which saw Lara exploring a temple in Egypt, dedicated to the goddess Bastet. Unfinished Business was intended as an alternate, more difficult finale to the game, featuring more mutant enemies and a focus on complex platforming. The concept for Shadow of the Cat was born from a cat statue used on the Carmon level, with the level theme after Cat's 9 Lives. Due to licensing issues, several later re-releases excluded the Gold's content. Interesting. So, later ports. So the game was released for the Mac OS on March 16th of 1999. It was ported on the platform Aspire and was based on Tomb Raider Gold. A port of the Pocket PC was published by Handango in July of 2002. It was released on the N-Gage as a Day 1 title on 7th of October of 2003 in North America and the 10th of October in Europe. And then the PlayStation version was re-released for the PlayStation Network in North America in August of 2009 and in Europe in August 2010. In 2015, the game was ported to mobile. As of August 2024, Tomb Raider is no longer available for purchase on the iOS App Store. And let's see, an attempt was made by Realtek VR in 2018 to remaster the first 3 Tomb Raider titles for Windows, but due to not having asked permission from then franchise owner Square Enix, the project was canceled. That'll teach them. Let's see, the game was re-released for Arcade as part of the Tomb Raider Collection 1 in 2024. Long-term interest from fans has also led to a number of unofficial ports. In 2016, developer Timur X Prager began work on OpenLara, an open-source port of the original Tomb Raider engine. The development further of this project enabled Tomb Raider to be ported to many modern and legacy systems, such as the 3DO Interactive Multiplayer, 32X, and Xbox, iPhone, and Nintendo 3DS. In January of 2022, a version for the Game Boy Advance was released, which attracted attention from several media outlets. Interesting. Let's see. So a remastered version. So the original game and then Unfinished Business expansion were released as part of the Tomb Raider 1, 2, 3 remaster, a high-definition remaster for Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Windows, Xbox One, and Xbox Series X and S. Released on February 14th of 2024, it was developed and published by Aspyr in partnership with Crystal Dynamics. The remaster includes options for new control schemes and revamped graphics. I like this version. I have the 1, 2, 3, because then eventually they came out with 4, 5, and 6 games, where basically it has like this mode where you can play the, more or less the original game's graphics, same controls and everything, or upgraded graphics, which kind of puts it in line with, I would say, like roughly like 6th generation style graphics, right? Give or take. Well, kind of between 6th and 7th gen. But it, runs at 60 frames per second. Everything looks really smooth. The better textures all the way around, and the camera control, and then the controls themselves are more in line with like more modernish 3D games, and which kind of feels a little off at first when you play it that way. I'm just so used to like the tank controls in a Tomb Raider game, but it gives you those options there. So I think that's a pretty cool package there, right? If you wanted to, if you've never played the original Tomb Raider games, that's probably, I would say, my recommended way of playing through those there. But then this here, right, the Nude Raider. So again, Lara Croft, she became, a really popular character, and also a bit of an exploited character. So an infamous part of Tomb Raider's history is a fan-made software patch dubbed Nude Raider. The patch then added an existing PC copy of Tomb Raider game, caused Lara to appear naked. In 1999, Core Design considered taking legal action against websites that hosted nude pictures of Lara Croft, stating that we have a large number of young fans and we don't want them stumbling across the pictures when they do a general search for Tomb Raider. Idle sent a cease and desist letter to the owners of the nuderaider.com URL that hosted the patch to enforce its copyright of Tomb Raider. Sites depicting nude images of Lara Croft have been sent cease and desist notices and shut down. And Eidos Interactive was awarded the rights to the Nude Raider domain name. A rumor stated that the game has a cheat code for Lara's nudity. Management did suggest adding to the developers, but they refused. Management suggested that. That's kind of insane. As a response to the controversy, Core Designs included a secret code in the sequel, allegedly a similar nude code. In fact, that makes Lara explode. That's kind of funny. So the reception of this game. So, I mean, at the time, it definitely got pretty good reviews all the way around, right? I mean, it was, I would say, in 1996, I would say that it was probably, we'll probably learn more about it here, but I would say that it was probably amongst the best game, and probably for some game of the year. I mean, obviously we had the big juggernaut that was Super Mario 64, which in ways was sort of similar as far as like, controlling a character in a 3D space. I mean, Mario 64 and this game were just really revolutionary for that. But outside of Mario 64, this is probably a fan favorite, right, for many people for Game of the Year of this year. So upon its release in 1996, the game was widely praised by video game magazines for its variety and depth of control, revolutionary graphics, intriguing environments, and use of occasional combat to maintain an atmosphere of tension. Ryan McDonald of GameSpot described the game having the puzzle solving from Resident Evil, the gory action of Loaded, and the ability to have a 360-degree freedom in gameplay. The game tied with the Sega Saturn version of Street Fighter Alpha 2 for Electronic Gaming Monthly's Game of the Month, with their review team saying it stood out from the rest of other titles, was PlayStation's best release of all time. Next Generation called it a thought-provoking, riveting action-adventure, easily on par in intensity with any of Hollywood's finest efforts, calling it a landmark title and potential trendsetter for that console generation. Yep, I mean, yeah, it was really revolutionary. Some critics rated the PlayStation version better than the Saturn version. McDonald wrote that its graphics were sharper, and GamePro scored it a half point higher than the Saturn version in every category, despite noting the former's solid showing. However, Next Generation said that it would not bother to review the PlayStation version because the differences between it and the Saturn version were negligible. I don't know about that. I mean, granted, if gameplay pretty much the same, right? Just with the different control scheme, right? Because the controllers for the PlayStation and Sega Saturn are vastly different. But other than that, I mean, it's the graphics should make for a much smoother experience on the PlayStation. No shade against the Saturn version, like I said, right and all, but yeah. It stated, let's see. similar, Electronic Gaming Monthly only reviewed the PlayStation version and stated in a feature on the game that both versions were playable and enjoyable while also having identical graphics. A retrospective analysis of the game by Digital Foundry referred to the Sega Saturn version as the least enjoyable version due to the lower frame rate and worse audio when compared to other versions. Next Generation reviewed the PC version of Tomb Raider Gold, rated 3 out of 5 stars, and wrote that it was a suitable purchase for series newcomers, with old players being more likely to download the levels from the gaming website. Tomb Raider was Computer Game Strategy Plus's 1996 overall Game of the Year and won the magazine award for the year's best 3D action game as well. It was a finalist for CNET's Game Center 1996 Best Action Game Award, which went to Quake. Electronic Gaming Monthly named Tomb Raider runner-up for both PlayStation Game of the Year behind Tekken 2 and Saturn Game of the Year behind Dragon Force, commenting that both versions had been designed to take optimum advantage of each console's capabilities. They named it runner-up for both Action Game of the Year behind Die Hard Trilogy and Adventure Game of the Year behind Super Mario 64, as well as Game of the Year again behind Super Mario 64. It won Best Animation in the 1996 Spotlight Awards. Less than a year after its release, Electronic Gaming Monthly ranked the PlayStation version of Tomb Raider the 54th best console video game of all time, particularly citing its vast and compelling areas to explore. In 1998, PC Gamer declared it the 47th best computer game released, and the editors called it tremendous fun to play and a legitimate piece of postmodern gaming history. In 2001, Game Informer ranked it 86th best video game ever made. They praised it for Laura's appeal to gamers and non-gamers alike. So sales and accolades. So at release, Tomb Raider. Jesus Christ. Let's see. Tomb Raider topped the British charts a record 3 times and contributed substantially to the success of the PlayStation. In the previous year, Eidos Interactive had recorded nearly 2.6 million pre-tax loss. The success of the game turned this loss into a 14.5 million profit in a year. There you go. As one of the top-selling games on the PlayStation console, it was one of the first to be released on PlayStation's Platinum series, and its success made Tomb Raider 2 the most anticipated game of 1997. More than Final Fantasy VII? Really? Well, maybe in Europe. By 1997, 2.5 million units had been sold worldwide. The Sega Saturn version was also a success, being one of the system's top sellers in the Christmas of 1996 season. In August of 1998, the game's computer version received the Platinum Sales Award from the Verband der... I'm not going to even try to pronounce that, but Verband der Unterhaltungsgassen Software Deutschland, while its PlayStation release took gold. These prizes indicate sales of 200,000 and 100,000 units respectively across Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. During the first 3 months of 1997, Tomb Raider was the 9th best-selling console game in the United States, with sales of 143,000 units. It made this country's highest PlayStation title for the period. Tomb Raider sold over 7 million copies worldwide. Tomb Raider, along with its success for Tomb Raider 2, were the 2 best-selling games in the franchise prior to the 2013 reboot. In 1999, Next Generation listed Tomb Raider as number 22 on its top 50 games of all time, commenting that the level design and art direction enabled a real feeling of exploration and accomplishment. In 2001, GameSpot listed Tomb Raider as its 15th most influential game of all time, saying it served as a template for many 3D action-adventure games that would follow and help drive the market for 3D accelerator cards for PCs. Oh, interesting. In 2004, the official UK PlayStation magazine chose Tomb Raider as the 4th best game of all time. It won a multitude of Game of the Year awards from leading industry publications. In 1998, Tomb Raider won the Origins Award for Best Action Computer Game in 1997. In 1999, Toby Gard and Paul Douglas won the Berners-Lee Interactive BAFTA Award for Best Contribution to the industry for their work creating the franchise. In 2018, the Strong Museum of Play inducted Tomb Raider to its World Video Game Hall of Fame. And so, yeah, I mean, so just its overall legacy, right? This, spawned the whole series of games, right? That is still continuing to this day. Like I said, right, the new remake of this game this is the second time that it's been remade. It's coming out, I think I think I said it earlier, but in early 2027. And then supposedly sometime later, we're getting like a brand new Tomb Raider game. They showed like a quick little trailer of it, like what was it, at the Game Awards, I believe. So the sequel to the game, Tomb Raider 2, was in the concept stage of production as Tomb Raider was wrapping up. Under pressure from Eidos Interactive, Core Design would develop a new Tomb Raider annually between 1997 and 2000, putting considerable strain on the team. A total of 5 sequels were produced. There's struggles accumulating in the troubled development of Tomb Raider, The Angel of Darkness for the PlayStation 2, which was, poorly received. Releasing to poor critical reception and lackluster sales, Eidos Interactive transferred the franchise to Crystal Dynamics, who would reboot the series in 2006 with Tomb Raider Legend. So Tomb Raider's gone through a few different reboots here. The game has been remade twice by Crystal Dynamics. So first there was a Tomb Raider Anniversary, so that was in 2007, and it was co-developed by Buzz Monkey Software, followed the Legend reboot in 2006. Guard acted as one of the story designers of it. And then the next remake, which is coming out next year, Tomb Raider Legacy of Atlantis, was being co-developed with Flying Wild Hog. Funny name. Additionally, a remake of the PlayStation Portable was in development at Core Design from late 2005 to 2006, entitled 10th Anniversary Edition. The game was canceled in favor of the first Crystal Dynamics remake, as their studio could handle more platforms. It was left in an unfinished but playable alpha state. A build of this version was leaked online in 2021, so there you go. I guess if you want to check it out, feel free to Google that. Following the release of Tomb Raider, Lara Croft herself became a gaming icon, seeing unprecedented media cross-promotion. These included commercials for cars and foodstuff, and appearance on the cover of The Face, and requests for sponsorship from outside companies. The level of sophistication Tomb Raider reached by combing state-of-the-art graphics, an atmospheric soundtrack, and a cinematic approach to gameplay was, at the time, unprecedented. While Guard enjoyed working at Core Design, he wished to have greater creative control and disliked Eidos' treatment of Lara Croft in promotional material, which focused on her sex appeal at the expense of her in-game characterization. Guard and Douglas left Core Design in 1997 and found their own studio, Confounding Factor. This prompted mixed feelings from remaining Core Design staff who were already working on the next title in the series. Speaking in 2004, Guard said he would have liked to produce a sequel, but noted that Lara had changed from his original concepts of her, leaving him unsure how he would handle her. Guard would eventually return to the franchise with Tomb Raider Legend. And so, that's a bit on Tomb Raider there. And so I remember when I first played this game, and we had the Sega Saturn at the time, right? So the game came out in I think it's in November of 1996 here in the United States, and so we still had the Sega Saturn only. It wasn't until maybe we were getting the PlayStation a little bit around this time, because Sega Saturn was our main platform, and so we got the game, and immediately when I was looking at it, I was like, wow, this looks incredible, right? And and again, all I had was a Sega Saturn to go off on, and that's the version that I poured tons of hours into and beat this game, and to rebeat it and try to find all the secrets and all. So I got very familiar with this version here, and so for the longest time, I just thought that this was like just a great game. At this time, now that I'm thinking about it, I kind of attribute this game to sort of really start losing that bit of a Sega fanboy that I had in me, right? And I was 16 years old, right? I'm a stupid teenager. And so, because what happened was, I was really liking the Saturn version. And, we were really focused on the Saturn because that's what we had. At the time, for better or worse, lucky my brother was a bit of a geek at the time too, and he started working as he was just out of high school, and so he started working, and so he was just buying up a lot of games, and I benefited from that just because I was like, oh cool, my brother's getting. He would almost buy a game every week, and so anyways, I remember Tomb Raider was one of the games that he bought, and so again, poured tons of hours into it and really loved it. We were being lured, though, to get the PlayStation, though. And a lot of it had to do because of the announcement that Final Fantasy VII was going to go on the PlayStation. Now it was going to come out in early 1997 in Japan, and then eventually in the fall of 1997. But we were really starting like, the PlayStation getting some pretty cool stuff. And as we were reading Game Fan magazine and, even other magazines at the time, there was a lot of cool stuff that really made us want to get it. I could be wrong, but I remember that there was a few games around this time that made us get the PlayStation early on, right? Because we're like, well, we might as well get it now because there's a lot of other cool stuff, right, that we can play until we get Final Fantasy VII, the following year. And it was, if my memory serves me right, it was Wipeout XL, Rage Racer, and we got those games because my brother was a bit of a fan of like really fast-paced action or racing games, right? And so those were games that kind of suited his gameplay style, which I really adore those games as well too. But also Tomb Raider. And so, we were like, well, let's check out this Tomb Raider game, right? They keep talking about how much it's better than the Sega Saturn version and all. And so I remember I think we either rented it or bought it. I don't quite recall which. And so the first time I remember putting up the PlayStation version, it was truly like eye-opening, right? Where I was like, oh my God, this is considerably better than the Saturn version as far as how it looks. Again, no shade towards the Saturn version. I think they did a really excellent job with what they had. But once I saw the PlayStation version, right, it kind of really opened my eyes up, right, to just how much better this system could really be, right? And then because I knew, like, from what I was seeing in the magazines and all, right, that that the PlayStation was better, just graphically it was selling more and all. But I didn't almost want to believe it because, again, I was still a bit of a fanboy at this time. But Tomb Raider was the one that says, you know what? It's okay to like multiple systems. It's okay to, to expand out your video game, library, right? That includes other systems. And again, we were lucky that we were able to do that because from what I recall, again, my brother was buying a lot of games. I think the girlfriend that he had at the time got the Sega or the Sony PlayStation, but ultimately she ended up giving it to my brother, something to that effect. And so I benefited from it, right? I was like, dude, we got the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation. I was pretty blessed in that sense, right? When I was a kid or a teenager at this time. And so, but yeah, I remember it was Tomb Raider that I was like, yeah, I can't just be a Sega fanboy, right? I really need to expand out my overall gaming preferences, and it was kind of Tomb Raider that did that. And I remember it was it was three things that really sold me on the Tomb Raider on the PlayStation, right? And this is also where I became a bit of a geek to comparing different versions of games, which is why I love watching like Digital Foundry, right? Even if nowadays the differences on some of these games are so minute now, I still like watching that stuff just because I think it's fascinating, right? Like the differences in different consoles and all. And it started here because I remember when we first booted up Tomb Raider. So there was three things that made me really appreciate this PlayStation version. When you first boot up the game, you start going into, after the wolves attack that one dude, and then Lara Croft shoots him down, and then she eventually goes into this cave. Right at the start of the game, right when you're first moving Lara, you're like, oh wow, her character model looks different. Her face, her facial expressions, right, aren't all like distorted like the way they are on the Saturn, and everything just looks a lot cleaner and more. Like the ground shading, like I explained earlier, right? Looked, it was there, and it just everything looked fuller and better, right? It wasn't quite as like, I don't know how else to explain it, but the Saturn textures just kind of look chunky, if that makes any sense. So it just looked better. So that was the first thing right off the bat, immediately. The second thing was the first time I went into the water, like I talked about before, right? It was really like eye-opening. I was like, wow, the effects on this looks that much better. And then the third one too was there's I think in the Palace of Midas level, there's like a section in the game where I think you have to present a certain item there's like this hand that's on the ground. It's like from a statue. And if you happen to, I think it's like a bit of a Easter egg or a bit of a secret, right? Where if you happen to jump and stand on the hand for whatever reason, because it's not like the most immediate obvious thing, right? That you can stand on this thing, Laura turns like into a statue of gold, right? Hence, the Midas touch. And so when that happens on the Sega Saturn version, it's just like just a one color texture, right? That kind of looks almost like tan. Almost looks like she's turning more to a statue of sand more than anything. And so, it was pretty cool, right? But it was that. But then on the PlayStation version, it looks like actual gold, right? Because it's shiny, it has reflections on it and all. And I remember just being really outstanding by that. I was like, oh, wow, that looks incredible. Well, I guess on that note too, also the save crystal too. So on the Saturn, it's just like it's a crystal, right? But it's just sort of like a sky blue sort of color with a little bit of shading on it. Where on the PlayStation, it's like this dark blue, but it also has like reflections on it and all. It just has for like a cooler effect. So anyway, so ultimately, the PlayStation 1 just has better overall look to it. And the other thing too, also, right? This is where I started experiencing the different like frame rates. So the Sega Saturn version, it runs pretty well, and it's still a playable version, right? Like if you wanted to check out the Tomb Raider for the Sega Saturn, it's a playable version. But this is where because I remember there was this one section where you're kind of like in a sewer area. I think it's in the Rome stages and all, but it's a pretty open-ended area, right? And I remember in the Sega Saturn version, it kind of hurt my eyes a little bit because I was like, I didn't quite understand it at the time, right? But I was like, everything just seems like choppy and moves a little slow. Now I got used to it just because, again, I didn't know any better, and frame rates, I didn't quite understand all that at the time. But then I remember when I got to that section on the PlayStation version, I was like, this feels smoother, like it runs better, and so. Because it was running at a faster frame rate. The PlayStation, they both target 30 frames per second. The PlayStation one definitely hits that more often than the Saturn one. And the Saturn one, when the areas get more open-ended, it definitely struggled. I could be wrong, but I want to say I think it might have jumped down into like the teens, right, for its frame rate. And so again, it just made the PlayStation version an overall just better experience. But either way, though, I had a lot of love for both versions. The Sega Saturn version, just because I'm so nostalgic to it, because that's the one that I beat and played all the way through. Where the PlayStation version, maybe we did only rent it because I don't think I ever beat that one back then. But I played enough of it, right, and all to at least gone up to the point that I've talked about to really see the differences in them. But yeah, it was definitely an experience playing this game, and I remember there was. Nowadays, right, with like female characters, there's a lot of like backlash against that, and I think a lot of it just has to do with there's a lot of things that go into it, right? On one end, it's that it gets into this culture war stuff where if you have a female character, it's woke, right? Or if you have a female character, she needs to be hypersexualized. And I think why Tomb Raider succeeded back then, and again, it was different times, but was because there was sort of like I guess you can say a sexual appeal to her, with these, I guess, right? And I'm talking about because the graphics were so crude back then, but I think it was more that she was just like a cool character to control, right? Like I said, she had a certain confidence about her. She was a pretty kick-ass action star, and so I think there wasn't really so much of a backlash back then as far as to her being a female. Again, a lot of that could have to do with her very sexualized style, right? And Toby Gard's, what I mentioned there earlier, right? That he wasn't happy with the way Eidos Interactive was promoting her because they were really focused on her sexuality. So I'm sure that had a big part of it to do, actually, right? But at the same time, too, though, right? She's just a cool character. So I don't think that a lot of because gaming is. Nowadays, I don't know for sure, right? But I know back then, gaming was mainly males. And so I don't think many males had issues playing with her and all, just because she was just a cool character, right? I don't think, at least I know per se, I didn't think of like, oh, this feels lame on controlling a female character. It was just, she was just a cool character to control. Nowadays, right, things have, the industry has kind of changed a lot and all, right? And so we'll see how they handle her characterization in the new one. But at the very least, regardless, though, right, I think that she at least made a big step towards gamers accepting a female lead character in their games. And so, there was she's definitely probably one of the more prominent female gaming leads in all of video games. There's Samus, and then, Lara Croft, I would say, is probably at the top, though, because even though Samus is a great character, she was around from earlier, and and her games are generally been better, with the Metroid games. The fact that you don't really see her, right? You're just always seeing this sort of like android, figure, right, walking around, right? You don't really, it's not immediately obvious that she's a female character, where Lara Croft is, obviously a female, and so I think because of that, I would have to give it to Lara Croft as far as like who I would say is a leading lady in video games. And I mean, so much so that her, like I said, she had such a big impact on the industry overall that there was movies that were even made of her. There was I think it was 2001, where there was the Angelina Jolie that played Laura, who, as far as looks goes, because they almost have a similar face, it was pretty spot on, right? Casting. But, you know, Angelina Jolie being an American actress, and so not having a natural English accent kind of hurt the characterization some. And so, I mean, she doesn't do a horrible job, but, you know, the English accent is kind of a big deal to Laura's character. And then also the padding that they gave her, right? I don't know, looks a little, it kind of led to a little bit too much of the cartoonish sort of like look, right? That kind of felt out of place in a movie. But otherwise, it's the first movie. It's entertaining. It's not bad. It's entertaining. It's got Lara Croft. It's also got Craig Smith. God, the James Bond dude. God, I forgot his name. Craig Smith. And so overall, it's a fun watch. And then a few years later, I think 2 years later, there was a second Lara Croft movie. It was Lara Croft Cradle of Life, I think is what it's called. Also has Lara Croft in it. I'm sorry, of course it has Lara Croft. It has Angelina Jolie in it as Lara Croft. And that one there, it's not bad also. And then later on, there was another Tomb Raider movie. I forgot what that one's called, or the lead, or if it has a subtitle to it, or who the lead actress is in it. But that one took more inspiration from like the more recent Tomb Raider games. And again, I'm not sure if that one's any good or not. But I would say at least the first two movies with Angelina Jolie, they're worth watching, right? I mean, like I said, they're not too incredibly good, but they're fun enough watches. But yeah, she definitely left a lasting legacy in the video game industry, and so here's looking to her next several games, right, that are coming out. That the legacy of Atlantis definitely has my interest, just because again, I'm a huge fan of this whole Atlantis thing, and I think that it's not my favorite Tomb Raider game, but it's definitely my favorite in terms of like setting. So if they get this game right with gameplay, puzzles, and the overall look of the game and all, then this could end up being my favorite Tomb Raider game. So kind of excited to check it out for that reason there. Otherwise, I would say that my favorite Tomb Raider game is probably, I really like the 2013 reboot. I think that one's good. And then Rise of the Tomb Raider and Shadow of the Tomb Raider are excellent as well too. But maybe that Rise of the Tomb Raider, or not, I'm sorry, the 2013 reboot, I think is my favorite one. But either way, though, hopefully that gave you some information on Tomb Raider itself and just the overall legacy that this game had, or at the very least, if it brought you a little bit of nostalgia for this game for back when it was released. So if you did play it back then, what were your thoughts on it? Did you play the Sega Saturn version by chance? And what do you think about the differences between the games, or any other thoughts that you have on these games here? And so, assuming that if I'm still on schedule, right, for the next podcast, and I've been saying this for a while, and I've still been able to get these out weekly, it's getting a bit tough to get these out. So I don't know, again, right, how much more I can continue doing this, but I'll definitely make an effort to do that. And so if I do, the next game that we're going to talk about next week is, well, the game that is considered the best game of all time, and that is The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64. That game really needs no more further introduction. It's still the highest rated game on Metacritic of all time, and so pretty excited to talk about that one, just because it's a great game in itself, right? Definitely one of my favorite games of all time, and also because the remake of whatever it ends up being is right around the corner. So here's to kind of get hyped a bit for that as well too. But until then, hope you have an excellent week, and we'll see you in the next one. Have a good one.